Let's listen to this. I'm going to skip the part with the copyrighted music. 49th Parahel is a proud member of the Harbinger Media Network. See, I got a community of progressive listener-supported podcasts transmitting from the world to come. Check out our partner shows at harbingermedianetwork.com. The gig economy is just getting in. Okay, let's listen to this. Future of this project. Of course, also working with Passage, the online. Subscribe to the over as usual. That also have to deal with your career as being over as usual. But until then, okay. Niki Ashton is going to be joining the program right after this Soviet synth pop. This is the part of the interview where it's kind of fading in over the music and everything. I was just wondering, how has this whole pandemic process been for you? I know it's something I like to touch on usually with most of my guests because it's kind of been a different experience for everybody. It's obviously different for people that have kids, and you obviously, on top of that, also have to deal with your career as being an MP as well. So how have you found this whole crazy situation over the last 8 months or so? Gotta love the Soviet synth pop.
Yeah, crazy is the right word. It's had its intensity. I mean, first of all, right off the bat, our region, northern Manitoba, and I'm joining you from my home in Thompson. Our constituency is one of the most vulnerable in the country when it comes to COVID-19. So it's been very important for me to be a strong voice for our region, to be in constant contact with First Nations leaders, Métis leaders, folks involved in the labor movement, concerned about COVID-19 in our industrial workplaces, advocates in our communities, and our communication has been around the clock, both in the first wave, which we managed quite well, and now in the second wave, where Manitoba is the worst province in the country for per capita cases of COVID-19.
I did not realize that.
That's been on top of my regular work in Parliament, right? The question period, the committee work, and all of that stuff. But it's certainly there's a pressure pressure I put on myself, I guess, to really be outspoken about the very real threat that First Nations and communities across our North face. Now, of course, all of that is in addition to being a parent. And like many parents, our childcare, I mean, I've got young kids, twins that are 3. Our childcare fell through because of COVID-related restrictions. And, and it really speaks as well to the really, the lack of childcare opportunities in our country overall. I've spoken to that, especially in the context of work in Parliament, but now I'm seeing it in terms of, this crisis that we're all facing and how childcare has really emerged as a critical issue coming out of this crisis. So we've had the kids at home. My partner is full-time at school and doing some work.
Hello, Kale boys.
At home, fortunately, but it means a lot of balls are up in the air, and a lot of times there's to
say the least,
twins that are I like to joke that I'm raising advocates, so they have some very strong opinions about what needs to be done right now. So
I'm familiar with this kind of technique as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's just no balance, I guess, to be found, but it's a matter of setting priorities and being mindful that as parents, our kids are going through a very uncertain time as well. They can feel the uncertainty. They certainly at this age, they don't understand exactly what we're all doing here. Being.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, sometimes my son gets very obsessed with, like, toys and, like, wanted to see different toys. And he doesn't even want, like, he's always asking, his favorite thing to do is look at toy videos on YouTube. And then his favorite thing to say is, like, I wish I could have that toy. I wish I could have that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but you've got hundreds of other toys. Like, why don't you just play with those? And he's like, no, I just want this new thing. And then sometimes if you cave and get in the new thing, he's excited for like 5 minutes. And then he's right on to the next like thing that he wants. And my partner's often like, he's going to be a capitalist. I'm like, no, absolutely not. We don't even speak that word in this household. No. But, that's an ongoing project here. And yeah, like people were pointing out in the chat, I voted for Niki for the leadership. And I did as well. I was really, like, it was 2016, just post-Trump. And it looked like there was a possibility to like reorient the NDP in that direction. She was really like obviously inspired by the Sanders campaign. And, so I joined the NDP specifically so I could vote for Niki Ashton in that leadership election. I was disappointed that it didn't work out that well. And we've been kind of like disappointed with the direction of the NDP since that time, with the odd bright spot. And we talked a little bit about this in this conversation.
Supportive of them, and that's something I'm very mindful of. I will say I am very, very happy to see that Parliament has moved to a virtual model. This is something that we should have been doing even before COVID, whether it's our greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's the need to find some way to balance work and life, particularly parenthood.
I'm exclusively joining parties to vote in leadership
Parliament
elections.
Has finally
That's right.
proven, and obviously because of the COVID
That's how
crisis,
I operate.
That our work can be done virtually. I mean, it's
you just need to get a member card to vote for
but,
leadership. That's right.
But the fact that I don't have to leave one of the most vulnerable parts of the country to represent my community and our region is huge. And I hope this is something that we will carry forward even after the vaccine starts working. Because let's face it, Parliament, as well as many other workplaces, could be doing their work more effectively and more in line with our climate priorities and more in line in terms of what we should be looking at in terms of quality of life.
Yeah. So you mentioned the childcare stuff, and that's been something I've been kind of dealing with as well, obviously. And my son's been back at daycare. He's almost 5 years old, and he was kind of like, for the time being, he's still there. I don't know how much longer that's going to be continuing, but he was kind of having a bit of a hard time after spending, several months just kind of at home with me every single day, which I think if it was up to him, he would probably just prefer to just do that all the time. And then, you have to have sort of kind of empathy with kids when you realize that, like, he's been back at daycare, but it's also a very kind of like strange and surreal experience. Like his daycare workers, who are like really working very hard to make it normal and fun for the children, but they're wearing masks and PPE. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a very strange situation for kids, and sometimes we kind of lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is, and I would say that I see that being particularly the case in Canada. I mean, I totally feel for what your little guy is going through, what all of our kids are going through. It really, first of all, I mean, I think, we and we've heard some pandering from the Liberals that, now they know that childcare is so important. Well, let's see, a national universal childcare program come out of this.
They've been saying that for a couple decades now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so now again, they remembered it, right? But, and I am concerned to hear about some of the sort of province by province arrangements that they want to make. I mean, I just think of the Conservative government here in my own province that does not value childcare in the least. We need to make sure that there are national, that this is a national program, that there are national standards, and absolutely the crisis has proven how critical childcare is, and how when childcare isn't there, the burden falls disproportionately on women, and women and our entire society is further held back. So I think that's one key point. I mean, the other piece I would say is and I'll certainly speak to the reality in our own province. We're I mean, and there's been a fair bit of coverage recently. I mean, I think it's completely outrageous, frankly. I mean, here in Manitoba, where we have such a high case count, such a high positivity rate, again, the worst province in the country as a province. I mean, I realize other regions are more hard hit, but as a province, we are really struggling. We're entirely under code red now with very tight restrictions, but schools and daycares are still open, right? So this idea that somehow that, the economy, right, has to keep working, frankly, at the expense of everybody, including the health of our of course our children, but very much so in knowing the demographics that are most impacted are teachers, support staff, daycare workers, and knowing that the supports aren't there in terms of PPE, aren't there in terms of infrastructure. Rules are being bent left, right, and center to make to keep everything, quote unquote, everything going.
No lies detected, Sam.
And it's farcical. I mean, it's really important for us to recognize that
if you're a politician, you got to speak truth to power like that. I'm sorry.
Not come ahead of people's public health, of people's lives. And
feel free to plug the event, Grammar Socialist.
That's
go for it.
A country I'm very connected to. My first language is Greek, and right now they've put in a circuit breaker lockdown where they've shut everything down except for essential workplaces, and that does not include schools and daycares. But there's a very set time limit to this, and it's very much based on public health and science, and I see what's happening here, and I just shake my head. We just now got a ban on not being able to buy non-essential goods. So if you go into the supermarket, you can't buy a magazine, but you can still send your kids to school and to daycare, right? And so it really shines a light on how we have our priorities wrong here in Canada in particular. I mean, obviously the states can speak to their own reality, which is even worse, but I think. And again, we don't want to go through, we went through in the spring, which was endless weeks and months of not knowing and lockdowns with severe mental health impacts, including on our children. But the time is now, given the case counts, case numbers we're seeing, particularly in places like Manitoba or the Greater Toronto area, and we just have to just, sit down and make it clear that, again, people's health, people's lives should be put ahead of profit.
And it's interesting because you mentioned the sort of childcare approach, which has been kind of delegated to each province to sort of figure out. And I find that method of doing things, whether it comes to childcare, whether it comes to COVID response in general, is kind of just a way for the federal government to kind of kick the can down the road and sort of absolve themselves of having to take responsibility for what should be kind of a national approach, because it's really difficult to confront this crisis when each province has sort of their own approach to confronting it. And it's kind of created this whole kind of disjointed and chaotic response, which is not, we can see in the results, is not really doing what we need to do to actually move past this crisis.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And it's the liberal way where they use the buzzwords, they pretend as though, they care about the middle class, they care about the environment, they care about childcare. It's a long list of what they care about.
We hate the liberals, folks.
They'll do the flashy announcements and emote and tell us, how they feel for us and feel for the Canadian people, feel for Canadian moms, Canadian dads, Canadian children, whatever. And then they'll come up with, or their actions certainly don't reflect it, and they'll find a back.
Yeah, I'll try to lip sync.
To get out of the responsibility that.
PDB, you can come when the borders are open. Yeah. Who knows when that's going to be? Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, before we move on, I just wanted to formally welcome you to the show, Niki Ashton. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate that you took the time to join the show. It's been a long time coming, and I'm happy you could come on and talk to me.
My pleasure, Rob, and I'm a great fan of your work. So.
Hey,
so it has taken a while, mostly for the reasons I just mentioned.
Yes,
but I'm really thrilled to be here.
No, it's interesting because one of the first political articles I wrote was actually about you in the NDP leadership race, and how you were kind of trying to create that kind of a Bernie Sanders movement here in Canada. Something that I was. Yeah, good point, Lana. Appreciate her talking about the burden it places on women, almost like the gender division of labor is a real material issue and not liberal id poll. I think that's a good point. Space Ace, hey Rob, I've been lurking since Lucid rated. I just got back to my computer, but I wanted to say that I really appreciate and like the new kind of media you're trying to promote in Canadian politics. Thank you. As a young progressive Albertan, seeing leftist thought getting more popular online especially makes me so excited. Thank you for the work you're doing. Space Ace, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I really hope you're listening to Alberta Advantage as well. If you're in... if you are in Alberta, I have a Nightbot command for this. But Alberta Advantage.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob.
And thank you for subscribing as well. Oh, and a gifted sub from Corin B. Thank you very much. Is it this? I think it's this. I'm sure you're listening to it already. Is that it? No. Okay. Okay. Let me see here. One moment, everybody. One moment. Yeah, and please check out the link that Grammar Socialist is posting in the chat.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, and thank you for gifting a sub to Grammar Socialist, Mark. I really appreciate that, my friend. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Exquisite Syrup. You figured it out before me. Thank you. But please, Space Ace, if you're in Alberta, if you're a isolated progressive leftist in Alberta, please listen to Alberta Advantage podcast. Very, very good podcast. And again, everyone, please check out Grammar Socialist's event here. Wednesday, we're having a social networking event with Heather McPherson MP for Edmonton Strathcona. The link's right there in the chat. You can go check that out. And yeah, everyone, if you're in the area, I encourage you to investigate that as well. It's like kind of excited and inspired by. So it's an interesting full circle moment. It's been a long time coming, and I'm happy you could come on and talk to me.
My pleasure, Rob, and I'm a great fan of your work. So it has taken a while, mostly for the reasons I just mentioned.
Yeah,
but I'm really thrilled to be here.
I had to listen to that again. No, it's interesting because one of the first political articles I wrote was actually about you in the NDP leadership race, and how you were kind of trying to create that kind of a Bernie Sanders movement here in Canada, something that I was kind of excited and inspired by. So it's an interesting full circle moment for me to be able to speak to you here on the show.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I remember that, and it seems like many moons ago. But,
maybe she is lurking.
We're living through the I guess the aftershocks of the American election. So
yeah, and so Lana, you mentioned the AA episode about Jason Kenney's Holocaust denial. Definitely, and I know they have an episode this week about our history with far right Ukrainian immigrants and the way that we brought in these Ukrainian fascists in the post-World War II period in order to disrupt the Ukrainian diaspora that was heavily oriented towards socialism and labor unions, and that's the reason why we have monuments to Ukrainian SS divisions in Canada right now. I know Alberta Advantage has an episode on that this week. I was planning on listening to it on this show. I probably won't have time today, but probably Wednesday I'm going to listen to that as well. Alberta Advantage.
So much of what the ways that Bernie inspired us. I mean, it continues to be so relevant, and I would say even more relevant given the.
That's our Operation Paperclip, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that was actually something that I wanted to mention. I don't want to talk about the U.S. too much because there's so much going on in Canada, but obviously, it does take up a lot of oxygen in the sort of news cycle, the ongoing affairs of the United States. And so I did want to bring that up because the NDP and Jagmeet Singh and you yourself have spoken out pretty strongly against Donald Trump. In the lead up to this election, also, Jagmeet Singh encouraged Americans to vote for Joe Biden, which correctly, I think, and were criticized by some and praised by others for taking this kind of stance. But as someone who has campaigned with Bernie Sanders and has been inspired by his ideas, was this a bit of a balancing act for you? Were you disappointed at all in the way that the Democratic primary turned out, even though you might recognize the necessity of the United States to move past the Trump era?
Yeah, so is Niki Ashton Rob's first interview with a sitting MP? No, because I did talk to Matthew Green a few months ago as well. That's true. But like I said, I got, Niki Ashton was kind of part of the way that I got into writing and speaking about politics. That was one of my first kind of political articles that I published was about Niki Ashton. So it was exciting for me to be able to talk to her. It's a really kind of a full circle thing.
Oh, I'm very disappointed the way the Democratic establishment.
She doesn't hold back on this either.
Attacked Bernie Sanders and his campaign every chance they got. And I was once again, his race in the primary was deeply inspiring to me and to many, not just progressives here in Canada, the people on the left, but also many young people. Bernie was once again not just raising the issues that matter to our generation and matter to people that see
reversing
reverse Operation
see the
Paperclip.
need
I like the
for
sound of that.
democratic socialist solutions, but he was building an inspiring movement.
I like that.
He has built an inspiring movement. I mean, a number of progressive candidates have gone on to win at various levels of government, including now we know in Congress. He, again, building on that first primary, of course, building on his life's work, but he has succeeded in building a movement that I would say very much propelled change in the United States. I have no doubt that if Bernie was the actual nominee, he would have done even better than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think it's so pathetic that they went after Bernie, for example, that if he said certain things, certain swaths of America wouldn't vote for him, like, Florida, for example. Well, I mean, Joe Biden didn't win Florida. So, it was deeply
I'll look into that, Grammar
enraging,
Socialist. Thank you.
Frustrating to see how the establishment, went after him on arguments that were false, but just to prop up their own agenda. For me, what was very important in sort of in the last certainly the last couple of years has been very much to denounce the rise in fascism in the U.S. and the way in which Trump propelled that. We're seeing very much similar trends here in our own country. We're seeing that even under the Conservative Party, under Erin O'Toole as well, like, peddling xenophobia, xenophobia, a kind of, you have MPs like Derek Sloan, who ran in the Conservative race, on some pretty fascistic elements. Nobody's asked him to leave the caucus, and in fact, I had to go toe to toe with him on his anti-trans, on his transphobic views in Parliament just recently, right? So all to say that denouncing that kind of hateful extremist politics has been very important for me, and I was very much keen on amplifying Bernie's message, even in the lead up to the U.S. election, that this was about issues, not about candidates. And, I remember that Bernie said, the healthcare is on the ballot, racial justice is on the ballot, the working class is on the ballot, the climate emergency is on the ballot. And that's, that's how I view politics, period, that it needs to be about the issues. Obviously, it is connected to the candidate and the party.
Finstigator,
but,
definitely lots of flirting with the QAnon. We get into that a little bit more after. I'm glad Trump is out. I mean, eventually he will really be out, despite what he says. I'll be right back, folks.
But for me, it's very
Listen to
clear
Niki and me.
that,
I'll be right back in 1 minute.
At their own peril, the Democratic establishment will continue to attack progressives within. I'm really disturbed by the way in which disturbed by the way they've gone after progressives and Alexandria
kind of immediately following the election.
Exactly,
it's a little troubling.
Exactly, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's interview, really shone light on that, and the way such an inspiring woman is how did they try to push her down is disturbing, frankly. But I mean, I will say in my own experience, and having ran for leader, which of course you mentioned, I've certainly seen the way in which our own party needs to take lessons about, how not to shy away from progressive principles and silence progressive voices. And that's something that, we, just because we're an NDP and not sort of the two-party system in the U.S. and we have a different history. We also have to look within and be the principled and progressive party at all turns that that we were formed to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something, going back to the leadership race, like you really ran as that kind of a candidate, someone that was going to advocate for those kinds of social democratic policy and particularly kind of targeting young people, you mentioned. And since that time, do you think the NDP has gone far enough or done enough to appeal to these younger voters, people who more often than not have an increasingly skeptical view of capitalism and are looking for more kind of radical solutions to confront things like the climate crisis, or who just keep on living through these kind of nonstop cycles of economic crises. And do you think that the party has done enough to assuage those concerns and reach out to those folks?
The short answer is no. I think that what we saw in our leadership campaign is that when you make a clear, bold campaign on putting forward a bold vision on how to tackle the growing challenges of our time, whether it be indigenous and racial injustice, whether it's growing inequality, whether it's the climate emergency, that when you put those bold ideas forward about how to tackle these challenges, people not just respond, people mobilize, people organize, and these ideas, have power behind them. They have people behind them, and our leadership campaign proved that if you put forward bold ideas, there's momentum that they will carry the day, and I'm really proud of the fact that a lot of the bold ideas we put forward were adopted by the other campaigns by the end of the race. My hope, however, was that will continue after a leadership race and
little shade
into the
there.
future, because these challenges have only become more serious. Growing inequality, and we've seen this pandemic that the rich have gotten excruciatingly richer at the expense of everybody else, and the climate emergency has has only become more pressing.
No one in America isn't a capitalist. James Ed Smith, what do you own? Capital? What capital do you own? I don't own any capital. Do you own any means of production? I sure fucking don't. I'm a gig economy worker for like tech overlords. Do you own capital? I don't own any fucking capital. I'll tell you that much. I don't think she does. I don't think she's like a landlord. Well, no, Sam said she had political capital. Unless I'm just missing stuff. Unless I'm missing stuff in the chat. Yeah, because, saying she has political capital is different from saying she's like a capitalist. Political capital means you have like wiggle room to work with, right? I think that's what Sam was referring to. We might differentiate on like the effectiveness of the squad or whether they need to split off from the Democratic Party or all this stuff. Okay, AOC is a capitalist and I'm kind of skeptical of her. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would describe her like that. Definitely. Sorry, James, I didn't mean to call you out there. I wasn't sure. I thought there was some like shit talking going on that I was trying to jump on. I don't mean to single you out, my man. Is this the social capital debate again? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if I would describe her that way as well. I think, I have critiques of her as well. I think she's like bent too far sometimes towards the direction of like trying to appease the sort of liberal establishment of the Democratic Party. I think she's like gone against, like she had that conversation with Jeremy Corbyn and then immediately gave into like the bad faith like smear campaign against Corbyn without pushing back on it. She kind of threw Ilhan Omar under the bus that time when she was being accused of anti-Semitism, like incorrectly. So I've got issues with that as well. I'm not sure I would call her a capitalist though, especially since she's really advocating for more government control over things like healthcare and against that kind of like privatization process. Yeah, she's a soak dem. Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, I think she's got to get tougher as well. Let's move on with the interview. I don't want to get bogged down in this conversation.
Issue as time has gone by. That our world has been rocked by whether it's the murder of George Floyd or the RCMP's brutal violence against Indigenous people, right? So this isn't the time to take the foot off the pedal and throw out slogans and hashtags. We need bold ideas, and we need to work with the movements on the ground, the activists on the ground who are fighting for these ideas, this vision day in and day out. And there's still so much of that happening despite a pandemic that's made it more difficult, more challenging to organize and mobilize. But still, the NDP has a responsibility to be that bold party on the left, and I certainly, it's been important for me to continue to be a voice on that front, and to really amplify and point to the power behind some of the really exciting activist work happening right now.
Yeah, so on the subject of the NDP's kind of solutions to a lot of the social problems we're having, and specifically focusing on the pandemic, I think anyone that really kind of pays close attention to this, that is not like a hardcore liberal partisan, recognizes that the NDP has played a strong role pushing Trudeau and pushing the Liberal government into a more, into a forceful, strong response to COVID-19. And we've seen kind of the Liberal Party and Trudeau become kind of like, he's getting all kinds of like international praise, especially compared to the United States, for our response to the pandemic. But yeah, I think that something that I've noticed is that a lot of this has been coming from the NDP and from the NDP's sort of agitation, like talking about the CERB, which has obviously been a contentious issue, but that has been received worldwide praise for Justin Trudeau. But it seems like the NDP has been kind of cut out of the actual praise and like the giving credit for this kind of what's being perceived as a strong response. Is that something that you've noticed as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I will say that, I am really proud of key wins that we've had during the COVID crisis, especially for so many Canadians who are struggling, whether it's CERB, whether it was the student support, disappointingly very little money for people living with disabilities, but that's something that we also push for, and we will continue to push for more. So these are key areas that. Of course, the wage subsidy program, these are key areas that the NDP pushed for. And absolutely, Trudeau has received a fair bit of praise about it. Am I surprised that the mainstream media is not acknowledging the NDP's work? Not entirely. I think this crisis has also proved the extent to which, media consolidation in Canada and right-wing media bias is a huge problem. It's also why I'm happy to do this podcast and other progressive podcasts out there, because our voices aren't being heard. And, and I know that there's a number of other areas that we've been fighting for.
Just to be clear.
That have also not been covered to the extent that they should. For example, the way in which we heard a lot, obviously, about the WE scandal, which absolutely we should have heard about. But the fact is that the Liberals have redirected significant amounts of money towards their rich corporate friends at the expense of Canadians during this time, and we've shone a light on how procurement has been used in nefarious ways to benefit Liberals. We've shone a light on how PPE has, in particular, and other equipment necessary in this in this crisis has been used as a pawn to benefit liberal friends. We've been outspoken on the major contract that was given to Amazon. The NDP's work to advocate for real tangible action and particularly financial support for Canadians, to be able to stay safe, to be able to survive at this difficult time is what's carried the day. What I do hope, however, is that through ongoing organizing in our universe and beyond, that we are able to point to the way in which not only is Trudeau taking credit for our work, but in fact this sort of facade that he's done everything in his power to support Canadians in this difficult time is not actually the case when again his significant public funds have gone to enrich his friends at a time when there's far less scrutiny.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to mention as well, because you mentioned the disconnect between liberal rhetoric and like actual policies and action, and Trudeau is very like a sterling example of that kind of tactic, and throughout his stint as prime minister, he's kind of repeatedly leaned on this kind of using this kind of populist language when it comes to economics. He's also certainly done that throughout this pandemic as well. Obviously, as you pointed out, this hasn't really always matched with the actual reality of what's been happening. And now again, lately over the last couple of weeks, he has been kind of hinting at this new kind of progressive turn or progressive shift in dealing with our economy, or kind of a willingness to rethink certain things about the way our economy is organized. Do you think that there's any kind of do you think he's being genuine about any of this stuff, or is this more just liberal smoke and mirrors that we're looking at here?
Well, I think Trudeau has, and his advisors and the people around him have their finger on the pulse of Canadians, where Canadians aren't tolerating business as usual, where they're not okay with Jeff Bezos becoming a trillionaire, while the rest of us, most Canadians fall further behind.
We support Jeff.
They're not okay.
Jeff, I support you, my friend.
In the kind of
I want you to be a trillionaire. Some of that's going to trickle down to me. So I appreciate
we're seeing. They're not okay with businesses, whether it's supermarkets or industrial workplaces like meat packing plants, or frankly, personal care homes. Using people, exploiting workers, and those of course who've been hardest hit by this pandemic are elderly. People aren't okay with this business as usual, profit at the expense of everything model, and so I think that's why
I should make a Bezos emote.
We've got to do things differently.
A laser eyes Bezos
not because
emote.
He actually believes it, because the status quo has been very good for him and for his friends, and the wealthiest in our country. And so I think it's so important now more than ever, in recent times at least, to be very clear in what an alternative vision for our economy looks like. And I'm the public ownership critic for the NDP.
Lana, you like some of this stuff.
And it's been very important for me to say clearly that for us on the left, we need to go beyond fighting rear guard actions and decrying privatization. Absolutely, that needs to be done. We need to mobilize against it. But we should also be going beyond that and proposing public ownership. For example, why aren't we producing, as Canadians, in a publicly owned model, the PPE that we need, or the ventilators that we need? Why aren't we addressing the massive infrastructure shortages that are at the root of why First Nations are so vulnerable to COVID-19, and particularly the housing crisis and the lack of infrastructure in too many communities? Why aren't we looking at nationalizing or significant public ownership in our airlines and our transportation sector,
telecoms as well,
and exactly, and telecoms telecoms as well. I mean, goodness, this
Nationalize it, baby.
pandemic has proven the extent to which, internet access is not quality internet access, and affordable internet access, isn't a luxury, but an absolute necessity. And so we can't just sort of sit by and say, well, that's nice that Trudeau thinks that. I mean, Trudeau's, his ministers are talking about an equity stake in airlines, and when I first heard that, I almost, fell off my chair. But an equity stake
talking
for
about
them,
nationalizing stuff
would not be
Carnova.
what for us on the left an equity stake would mean. The last thing we need is to pour public funding into corporations that are going to turn around and benefit executives and shareholders at the expense of workers and of course consumers, like in the example of the transportation sector. So, and again, I mean, I think for us in the NDP and on the left, we need to track with the so many Canadians who may not necessarily vote NDP that are saying, you know what, you're right. I mean, the system is rigged. It's rigged against most of us. The pandemic has proven the extent to which we're vulnerable, and the extent to which the capitalist system is not working in our favor. So let's do things differently, and it's our time to put forward that an inspiring alternative vision that works for Canadians, for Canadian workers, for Canadians pushed to the margins, for all of us.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because you mentioned the rise of the far right, which has been on an ongoing storyline in this country and elsewhere over the last couple of years. And what I find interesting is about how these far right groups will zero in on the language that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party use, and extrapolate from that, and imagine that he's planning some kind of communist takeover of our economy or something. These absurd conspiracy theories that they develop. That's always kind of very funny to me, kind of projecting this onto someone who's very much a part of the neoliberal establishment, who uses this kind of language about the economy or the environment, but more often than not sides with the interest of the wealthy or the oil companies. I'm just wondering, because we're talking about in terms of these groups that are gaining traction. We've seen people within the mainstream conservative movement have kind of signaled their willingness to associate
that's that
with
great
these
reset
folks.
shit.
Movements like QAnon, which are becoming more and more prevalent here in this country. Usually this is done just through kind of a wink and a nod, but sometimes it's kind of more overtly. Recently, Andrew Scheer, on his way out as Conservative Party leader, he encouraged Canadians to read The Post-Millennial, which is a publication that regularly platforms extremist writers and editors who often run cover for violent white supremacist groups and demonize anti-racist protesters and indigenous protest movements. So you mentioned this a little bit, but getting further into this subject, what do you make of this whole phenomenon? Are you concerned by the rise of these movements, and what do you think the solution is to kind of push back on the rise of the far right in Canada?
I am very concerned, and I am very concerned about the way it is.
I wish socialist God King Justin Trudeau. I wish that was the
normalized,
case.
I would say.
Don't threaten me with a good time, QAnon.
By elected officials in the Conservative Party. Earlier I mentioned Derek Sloan, who ran in the leadership, continues to sit as part of their caucus, continues to be outspoken in his views, which are extreme.
Yeah, James, the Great Reset kind of makes me laugh. It seems like more Pepsi cans solve Black Lives Matter bullshit. We've talked about this on the last couple of streams, definitely, about how they take this very milquetoast, boring, neoliberal response to these big crises, and they project this crazy conspiracy theory onto it that they think Justin Trudeau is going to be this subversive socialist figure, or that because Pepsi or the NBA supports BLM, then that means these are mainstream movements, or these ideas about racial racial disparities in policing and police violence are these mainstream issues. Complete nonsense. The fact that they take these very corporate ideas, these big corporations cashing in on the social justice language, phonies like Justin Trudeau pretending that they care about racial justice, or economic justice, and they think that signals that there's some kind of like big subversion of our capitalist economy going on, when really the capitalist economy is just becoming more entrenched under all these people. If the scary thing that all these guys are saying was happening, I would support it. I would think it was cool, but unfortunately they don't fucking understand anything about what's happening in the actual real world.
Xenophobic, misogynist, transphobic, and you name it, it's there.
Yeah.
And not only does he espouse them, he raises money off of them.
Yeah, why won't Trudeau follow in the footsteps of his father, Fidel Castro? I agree, it's a fail son.
Who
embarrassing.
Spends an inordinate amount of time talking about China.
Yeah, I'm glad she's pointing out the xenophobia
Trump,
stuff as well.
This sort of banging on the drum of the othering and this creating a tension that's unnecessary, I would say, and very much geared at encouraging racist sentiment, and particularly, I would say, within working class communities, right? So this idea that they took your jobs, right? That the reason why you're struggling is because of them, and what I would clearly say is we have to denounce this. We have to call it for what it is: the rise of fascism within our own country. The F word is a tough word for some people to use, and I've heard people, even in circles where we agree, right? They prefer to sort of, well, it's this, well, it's that, well, let's
Hands
call
off
it
China,
for what it
that's
is.
right.
And what Donald Trump has been peddling is fascism. What these far right groups are peddling under the guise of whatever they're calling it is fascism.
Yeah, fresh brew. This is a great point. Hopefully Trudeau doesn't turn out to be our Obama that leads to a Trump-like extreme conservative backlash. This is something that I have been concerned with, like, since I started getting involved in doing this kind of commentary more seriously, podcasting and stuff. I've just been waiting for this moment to come. I thought maybe in last year's election that was the moment that we kind of followed that path, and for a number of reasons it hasn't. But we're always, I think, 4 or 5 years behind the United States in these kinds of trends. I do think Trudeau very much is the Canadian Obama, and I've been convinced for a long time that we will be getting our own kind of brand of far right populism. We may be a little bit more behind the curve than we thought. The conservative movement hasn't totally figured this out yet, but I do believe that is going to come unless there's a real strong response from the left, which is possible because we have more of a left really in this country.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you for the sub, Abattoir 143. Thank you very much. So I do think we will be getting that moment unless our left gets its shit together and figures this kind of stuff out. And James Ed Smith, I didn't want to miss his comment. What do you think of this tactic of the right and using the exposure that even just slightly left-leaning politicians have gotten in the last 10 years to lump in right-of-center libs as being communist? Yeah, I mean, they framed Joe fucking Biden as a communist in this presidential election. It's so crazy, but does it have a bad effect, or will the attack ads just be about something else? I'm not sure. James, I think there's a possibility that it's had an effect of diluting the word communism down to mean nothing. So I think because they spent so long, these people calling like Obama and Joe Biden communists, or like the far right in this country calls Justin Trudeau a communist, I think it makes average people skeptical of those kinds of attacks, which can actually work in our favor because when we start getting to a position where our ideas are starting to be more prevalent, we're getting more of a platform to talk about public ownership, land reform, income redistribution, things that are kind of more communist. But then when the far right inevitably freaks out about that, the average kind of non-plugged in political person who's kind of not always aware of the stuff, that attack has been so diluted over the decades of being used falsely to describe these like centrist liberals. There's a possibility that we can kind of sneak under the radar with some actual communist shit, and people won't really take these kinds of attacks seriously until it's too late and we've already seized all control over the levers of power of the state.
And I mean, history has told us this is how it starts. It's not. It's something we have to take seriously now and denounce now.
Yeah, it just seems like crying wolf now. That's right.
And I think that's why it's so critical for us on the left to be listening to grassroots voices who are calling it out for what it is, who are highlighting, the impacts of these views and the way they manifest in violence and discrimination. I
agree with what you're saying, Lana, that people yelling that Trump is a fascist aren't really helping us understand the rise of fascism, but people on the left are way too hesitant to use the word even when it is appropriate. And yeah, it's not like Trump is a fascist and everyone in the Republican Party is not, there's no liberal that kind of leans in that direction. I think you could describe the entire U.S. government as fascist in terms of their political goals of the last several decades that we saw in the post-World War II period, Operation Paperclip, through Operation Condor in South America, Vietnam, through the Cold War of the 1980s. I mean, it's been a very specific ideological goal of destroying communism, and they've thrown millions and millions of bodies into this fucking relentless meat grinder of imperialism in order to accomplish that. And that is pretty fascist. And there might be kind of this pseudo-democracy here in the United States, there's might be the pseudo-democracy in the United States, but in terms of the people that have been in Central and South America, or Iraq or Vietnam or any of these other places, I mean, it's been pretty fascist to them, right? They didn't vote for the United States government, but they still have the United States government, flying fucking drones over their weddings and blowing them up, and overthrowing their governments with subversive coups and funding death squads and stuff like that. That shit is pretty fascist. The difference about this kind of modern era is we're starting to see this kind of fascism really start to take root domestically in the United States and actually affect people in the United States. That's why I think people are starting to say, oh, wow, we have to call this out. This is what this is. But the United States government has been fascist in terms of the millions and millions of people that it's affected with its foreign policy over the last several decades. This is really the only difference now we're seeing it domestically.
To be there working with allies on the ground who are pushing back on on this hate, and I think of my own province. I mean, we'll call him a terrorist who showed up at Rideau Hall this summer. He came from Manitoba,
yeah.
And right away, he came from a community just south of our constituency, and right away there was the media already whitewashing what he really stood for, right? I mean, if this was a Black or an Indigenous man, boy, would that story be different.
Yeah, I think about that often, how that would have turned into a big international news story, certainly, if that was an Indigenous person or someone else. But when you see the complicity of our media, not just far-right media, but our mainstream media in this country to legitimize these kind of movements by refusing to hold them accountable for having these views. Okay, so I would add to that the American and Canadian state have learned the lesson from the original rise of fascism to simply integrate fascist mechanisms into the state apparatus. I think that's 100% correct. And James, I don't totally agree. I think it's actually important to reclaim the idea of communism being good and just reject this whole red baiting argument, completely reject it. And start just embracing that and start normalizing the idea that you can be a communist and it's totally okay and it's in fact good and correct to be a communist. That's kind of how I view it. I think kind of giving up on that idea is giving into a very right-wing framing. And so it's in a way it's important to keep these terms around because it's a strong way, I think, of accurately describing a lot of political tendencies. And I think it's also really important to push back when the right wing frames things disingenuously. And if you can recognize the ways that anti-communism has been incredibly destructive to the global fabric, to the environment, it becomes important. It becomes an important project to reclaim that and just to say yeah, I am a fucking communist and I'm happy about it and it's good to be a communist and fuck off. That's kind of my attitude about this now.
Exactly. And, and the story doesn't end there. A right-wing radio owner, not radio host, but radio station owner from his community started a GoFundMe campaign for his family. And it was all over Facebook. I didn't actually end up seeing it until quite a bit later.
Similar to the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, right?
And the framing was, whatever you think about his motives, there's this family is struggling, and I couldn't.
Let's do that
right?
for the Boston Marathon
were
bombers.
Writing,
I'm sure people will react totally normally
about,
to that stuff.
Egging this guy on, right, and doing very much what you're talking about, vilifying Trudeau and using red baiting language, right, but certainly encouraging violence. And I was shocked. This isn't, it's out in the open, right? And how did we end up here? Right. And again, the dog whistle politics we're seeing from the right, we saw it under Harper, but it's, I would say since the rise of Trump, it's on steroids around the world, including here in our own country. Right. And I think it's very incumbent, like I said, for us on the left to be vigilant and to work with those on the ground who are vigilant because they have no choice, but they're doing it, on a daily basis. And let's make it clear that when it comes to the working class, right? This is about a system that's rigged. It's the rich corporate friends of both conservatives and liberals that have created a circumstances where the middle class is shrinking and more people are falling behind. There are solutions to be found within our own country.
Solutions
to putting an end to
there
that.
Certainly
this crushing inequality,
we know about the solutions, don't we?
There's a real hopeful role for the NDP in doing that, but there's also a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think a lot about my hometown. I grew up in Brockville, Ontario. And so this was in throughout the 90s. There's this process of deindustrialization that's happening. So that's been continuing over the last couple of decades, which is sort of an economic project that's been pushed forward by very much a bipartisan element of the political establishment in this country, both the liberals and the conservatives. And when I go back to Brockville now, I also notice how much more incredibly diverse it is, which is a good thing. But I can easily see how if you're someone who's kind of in the sort of working class in that city, if you feel she does my economic advantages have just gone away over the last couple of decades, my union job at a factory is gone, it's much more difficult to own a home. And then you look around and you notice this increasing diversity, how easy it is for a demagogue to come along to suggest that, these are connected. And the reason that you're economically struggling is because all these people that have come into
she's a politician,
and how that creates this situation where then people get pulled into these far-right movements. The reason that people are struggling economically is not because of immigrants coming into their communities, but because of a bipartisan consensus that has contributed to this kind of deindustrialization, has contributed to these economic problems. So I can see how easy it would be to get pulled into this kind of movement if you're just kind of a passive sort of observer of politics, just by sort of looking around in your community. And that's troubling.
Absolutely, and we've
she kind of filibusters
years
She's
of
a
watching
politician.
Donald Trump just it further exacerbate those troubling.
Just wanted to read Lana's comments about the CIA here because there's some good stuff in that. The fascist movement didn't actually fail or go away; it changed form. The West recuperated fascism and brought it into the fold of national security. Allen and Foster Dulles, from the CIA. Thanks again, CIA. Allen and Foster Dulles are two of the worst pieces of shit to have ever lived. Also, it's fun when you learn how much of the CIA top brass ended up either going insane, dying of some weird disease, or succumbing to crippling alcoholism, or some combination of all three. Couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people. Yeah, I'm not a spiritual person, but this makes me believe in karma. You put poison out like that into the world, it comes back around at you. Yeah, 100% agreed, Lana. And it's just with the history of this fucking organization is just absolutely surreal, and the decades of body counts and horrific human rights crimes that this government is responsible for, pretty much shaping our entire like global geopolitical situation, right? They've created this whole situation. Unbelievable the way that the impact that they've had to create this entire world, and the amount of fucking evil shit that they've done. And that's another thing that made Trump popular, right? Because when he talks about the deep state, and everyone say, "Oh, Trump's going off about the deep state again. Can you believe this guy?" But like, the reason that was successful is because there is a fucking deep state in the United States. It's called the National Intelligence Community, the National Security Establishment. That is the deep state. It's a very real thing. It's a complete bipartisan thing that operates like above and beyond the elected officials of the United States government. It doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter what ideology they're supposed to be pushing. Fucking JFK was the JFK assassination was the anniversary of it was yesterday. So it's another way that people then dismiss this idea, like, oh, Trump's rambling about the deep state again. Can you believe this guy? But like, he's describing something that is very real. It's very accurate. And of course it's Donald Trump, and he's framing it in this very narcissistic, selfish way about how does this affect me? But there absolutely is an extremely powerful deep state in the United States. I think that's a reason Trump had credibility with people, was because he was accurately describing this, even though he was doing it for like selfish and narcissistic reasons. Yeah, the military industrial complex. This is not new. Yeah, the U.S. government saw Hitler and said, "Wow, he really keeps him in line. Let's try fascism." In a way, it's been like that. I mean, I think part of the reason the United States government was against Hitler in the first place was because he was just getting too greedy in terms of taking over his own territory and wanting Germany to be the economic powerhouse of the entire global financial system. And the United States were like, no, fuck, that's our job. That's half the reason they fought against the fucking Nazis in the World War II in the first place. And you can tell that they mostly agreed with the Nazis' political project, because immediately after World War II, they pivoted to fighting the Soviets, the people that actually won the war and defeated the Nazis, and then made it the centerpiece of the next 50 years of their foreign policy to overthrow communism wherever it started to sprout up, no matter how many people they fucking butchered in order to do it. They definitely had much more in common with the fascist political project than they did with the other side.
Views. But again, I mean, I would say we have to be vigilant in terms of
Hitler got his ideas from colonial America and Jim Crow racism.
What's led us to this point, right? Job killing trade deals, private agendas of privatization and austerity, foreign ownership without any checks and balances, and at the expense of Canadian jobs and Canadian communities, right? I mean, you mentioned your experience growing up in Brockville. I mean, Thompson is my home community. It's a mining town, and it was a Canadian mining company that set it up. There were no they weren't angels by any means. In a very troubling history of disrespecting Indigenous rights, and that's something that still needs to be dealt with. But fast forward to the last 10 years, Inco was bought out by a Brazilian multinational. The Canadian government extended major loans and approved this deal with great fanfare. And within a couple of years, Sudbury was on its longest lockout it's ever seen. Here in our community, our smelter and our refinery were shut down, so that means we lost all of our value-added jobs, and the well-being of our community and our entire region that is very much connected to our community, as it is a hub, has paid the price, right? And who signed that deal? It was the government of Canada. Right. And it was started by the Liberals, but signed off by Harper and his people. They are the ones that said that this was better for us. Well, it wasn't, right? It was better for them, but not for us. And, previously I had done a fair bit of work as the jobs critic on the rise of precarious work in our generation, in the millennial generation, and for younger folks as well. And the loss of good family, community-sustaining jobs is deeply connected to very clear political and economic agendas around trade deals, around privatization, and around again, foreign ownership without any checks and balances, and not in the best interest of Canadians. So it's not rocket science, right? But those discussions aren't being had the way they need to be, and I would say there's a fair bit of grassroots organizing around that, to sort of build that solidarity amongst new kinds of workers, right? And precarious workers, finding those ways to build bridges and fight for justice for working people. But around us, what we're seeing is many people
Churchill backed a paramilitary fascist coup against communist Greece after they had helped the Allied forces.
Racist, extreme politics of that Donald Trump and conservatives are peddling.
And she talks about this because she's a Greek. Her parents
so I
are
wanted
Greek
to mention
immigrants.
also. You mentioned Donald Trump and how Justin Trudeau has been kind of held up as an example, as like the polar opposite of a Trump. And you see also in the United States, there's a kind of a liberal establishment in both politics and the media that seems very concerned with like holding Trudeau up as an example of like what a good quality leader can be. But on a number of levels, you've seen Trudeau go along with the Trump administration, particularly talking about foreign policy, which has been kind of bizarre to see. Talking about Venezuela and the kind of the ongoing sort of coup attempt in Venezuela, and how Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland have kind of tried to give this kind of coup attempt, this kind of human rights sheen, and kind of use this kind of progressive language about why they've been going along with this. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump, appointing Elliot Abrams to be sort of point man on this project, who's been involved in, covering up horrific human rights crimes in Central and South America during the Cold War. So it's been kind of preposterous to see Trudeau follow along with the sort of extreme Donald Trump foreign policy and still get held up as an example of like what a good, kind, and benevolent leader would be. And that was something that you criticized yourself and the NDP criticized in terms of that sort of foreign policy strategy.
I had to ask this though, people were going to yell at me.
You've been criticized personally, and the NDP has been criticized for doing things like voting for the Libyan bombing campaign in 2011, which hasn't really worked out very well for the people of Libya.
I had to do it.
Did that experience in any way inform the way you approach foreign policy issues today? Like, were you more? Do you think that inspired you at all to be more forceful in your denunciation of Trudeau's foreign policy strategy?
Well, I will say my interest sort of...
We're just anti-poppy, James. We're anti-poppy.
More academic sense around foreign policy is dates back to my undergrad. My hope was to work at the international level in human rights. And so my undergrad and my master's were in global political economy.
It's from a poem, a World War I era poem.
So I always maintain that...
we love talking about World War I in Canada.
In terms of the work that I do. On a personal level, both my parents are immigrants. My mom
Lana, listen to
lived
this.
in Greece during the military dictatorship there, and military dictatorship that was propped up by the U.S. So it's something that, I certainly know of through my family's history, and I guess I would say that I've been raised with and then went on to study the importance of having a critical anti-imperialist lens in terms of Canada's foreign policy work. Specifically to the Libyan bombing, I actually went and spoke to Jack Layton about it and how for me this was something that I had real problems voting for, and unfortunately I think we can point to that as an example of the way in which the NDP had lost sense of our principles of, yes, defending human rights, but saying no to foreign intervention. And I think there's a few examples that we can point to in those years where where it was wrong, right? I think
I thought that was a pretty good answer on that, frankly.
We've certainly seen Canada do more of that.
I felt bad kind of putting her in a weird position and framing that question about foreign policy with the reference to the vote for the NDP to bomb Libya. I knew people would get mad at me if I didn't ask about that, people on the left. And frankly, I was curious about what the answer was. And my impression I thought she came across really well talking about this, frankly. The fact that my impression was that, she did vote for this and did it because I think she was a young MP and was probably under a ton of pressure from the leadership and from like foreign policy people in the United States government to vote for it, and made the wrong decision in that case. And that's why I wanted to bring it up in front of that, in that kind of lens, just as the idea that like, I was wondering if she learned from that experience for going along with the foreign policy consensus that ended up being a disaster and not following what her instincts probably were, which was to say no. And then, I think that has, from my perspective, I feel like that has made an impact in the criticism she's made over foreign policy. Like, she was one of the first people in the government to question the Venezuela thing, and our government's role in giving this like a legitimacy. And she was pretty forceful with it. She talked about Morales in Bolivia, and goes on to talk about this as well throughout this interview. So I wanted to ask about the Libya thing, so it would satisfy the people that were watching that would think that she gets away with being involved in that vote. But I do think she answered that very well, and I do kind of understand her perspective on that. And I think since that time, she has been a really effective foreign policy critic.
Window dressing that we are this benevolent peacekeeping force.
I do not stand with Jim
from
the office either.
Couldn't be furthest from the case.
And calling out our role in peacekeeping as well. There, like no other politicians do this, or very few.
Because it is important for me to be outspoken, and to really point to the way in which Canada's words are masking Canada's actions, not just in terms of propping up unelected, reactionary forces in places like Venezuela or Bolivia and elsewhere, but also the way in which Canadian mining companies have wreaked havoc, and not just Latin America but around the world. And I was particularly
you don't hear this a lot from elected officials or MPs.
Supporting
this kind of stuff.
Activists that were against a Canadian mining company.
And thank you very much for gifting a sub
in an area very close to where my mom's
Matifa.
family is from.
Thank you very much.
And I saw the way in which not just the Canadian company but the Canadian state propped up the awful, destructive, environmentally and economically work of these companies.
Yeah,
right.
This is good stuff.
So
all true.
I think it's very important that we
Facts
speak
only.
truth to power to these stories and reiterate our support for democratically elected governments and leaders, support for the sovereignty of nations, the need
what are there
to
three politicians
have an
in this country willing to say this?
Policy. I mean, just a couple
it's
of weeks ago, I had the
amazing
chance to do a
to hear this
webinar
kind of stuff,
on Cuba, and
Cuba as well.
Canada has a relatively positive history with Cuba, but again, even there, we've let it slip in the last couple of years, and and I would say even now with the change in administration in the U.S., Canada needs to be a strong voice in pushing the U.S., pressuring the U.S. to lift the blockade, right? So we have a role to play as the left in Canada to denounce Trudeau's window dressing, and to put forward principled policy and a principled politics from our end.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the Trump era in that respect, hasn't it? Because it's like it's made it much more difficult. Though I do feel the left has a lot to answer for in regards to the ghost of Hugo Chavez's attempts to subvert American democracy. I mean, I actually support that. I support that, frankly. I mean, like I said this on Twitter, but it's like it's the ultimate flex if you're Hugo Chavez to like. Defend yourself constantly while you're alive against like U.S. election meddling and like, take over a country and win a bunch of elections and become this incredibly popular figure despite them constantly interfering in your affairs. And then once you've died as a ghost, going back and fucking with the U.S. election system and do election meddling as a ghost. That's a huge flex. Huge flex. We stand Hugo.
For people like Justin Trudeau or Chrystia Freeland to maintain this facade that we are this benevolent peacekeeping force, and it's kind of lifted the veil on many of the ways that we've contributed to a very destructive and very violent imperialism, often at the behest of the United States, but also at the behest of our own sort of multinational corporations located here, mining corporations, like you mentioned. So it's been interesting, the way that Trump has kind of highlighted some of these contradictions, and how I think more people have discovered a lot about the history of this country and have started to question certain things about this official narrative about what this country stands for. So I would never say that the Trump era has been like a net positive, but that is one thing that's been kind of interesting about it, how more and more people, I think, have started to question this official narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, so while I still have you, I know you've taken up a lot of your time already. I just wanted to mention,
I had to kind of do it to her again
back
on
to
this
kind
one.
of environmental issue, because
to.
This is something you've talked about a lot. You've talked about the necessity for things like public ownership of a Green New Deal in Canada, and focusing on the climate crisis and the environmental crisis. Do you think it has been difficult to orient the NDP as a party in that direction? Given that there's sometimes kind of a conflicting or contradictory message, like with regards to pipelines, for example, between what the federal party is doing and what the provincial governments are doing in Alberta and BC. How do you think the NDP can unify around a kind of cohesive or collective message on this subject? Like, do you think that's been an obstacle in NDP's sort of environmental policy?
I will say, it is very important that federally that the NDP get our climate policy right, and get a climate policy that is founded on the principle of justice. That it involves Indigenous justice and respect for Indigenous rights, constitutional rights.
I had to do it to her.
That it respects, the need to achieve justice, in terms of economic justice, including for working people. Sorry,
because I was distracted while I was asking that question, because I already have communists on Twitter getting mad at me because it's like, oh, you interviewed Niki Ashton? Well, did you ask her about bombing Libya? And it's like, yes, I did. We had a pretty productive conversation about it, actually. Maybe before you get mad without listening to it, you can actually listen and fucking pay attention to what I do. And then we can have an actual productive conversation about it, instead of just trying to score points on Twitter about this. And yeah, when it comes to this question, that's another thing that's something that I want to have people from the NDP come on my podcast to talk to me about this stuff. I want to support people like Niki Ashton, but at the same time, I can't just be like a fucking PR arm of the NDP. And when I talk a lot about when the NDP fucks up, and if I'm going to have someone prevalent from the NDP coming on, I have to ask her about it, And I think talking about the NDP's completely disjointed approach to climate policy, provincially and federally, that's they need to have an answer on that. And it was funny. I think she paused for 7-8 seconds before responding to this one.
That it our climate policy right.
With regards to pipelines, for example, between what the federal party is doing, pivot back to this kind of environmental issue, because this is something you've talked about a lot. You've talked about the necessity for things like public ownership of a Green New Deal in Canada, and focusing on the climate crisis.
Let me just listen to this, Mark, and then I'll bring you on.
Do you think it has been difficult to orient the NDP as a party in that direction? Given that there's sometimes kind of a conflicting or contradictory message, like with regards to pipelines, for example, between what the federal party is doing and what the provincial governments are doing in Alberta and BC. How do you think the NDP can unify around a kind of cohesive or collective message on this subject? Do you think that's been an obstacle in NDP's sort of environmental policy?
I will say, it is very important that
she was choosing her words carefully here.
That the NDP get our climate policy right, and get a climate policy that is founded on the principle of justice. That it involves Indigenous justice and respect for Indigenous rights, constitutional rights. That it respects, the need to achieve justice, in terms of economic justice, including for working people. you know, you know, that it be, you know, you know, our hope to turn the climate emergency around. You know, I mean, it is shocking that you know, here we are, a country that contributes you know, significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, where we've elected a prime minister and re-elected a prime minister now in a minority that loves to greenwash, you know, so many of his policies, and went on to buy a pipeline, right, with our money, right, and you know, and proceeds to ram it through despite opposition from First Nations and you know, and so many communities as well. So I think it's really important that we in the federal NDP get this right. This is about you know, Canada's. This is.
Yeah, I'm glad some politicians are calling out Canadian imperialism against South and Central America. At the same time, I'm frustrated most of them keep playing into the anti-China narrative cons are pushing. And I agree with you for the most part, but she, in this interview, explicitly pointed this out and pointed out especially how the right is leaning on this kind of xenophobic narrative. She specifically mentioned this, but it is incoherent. You're right.
This is about, you know, Canada's hope to get it right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I absolutely, I am concerned about the way in which, you know, I mean, disagreements will happen with provincial levels of government. You know, I've seen that in the case of my own province, sure, where I was elected while we were in government here as well, and there were disagreements on key issues. You know, but what I think is so important is to recognize that, you know, I mean, yes, we want to get elected and yes, we want to win, but not, you know, power for power's sake. And it has to be to make a difference. And we can no longer talk about making a difference only in terms of some of the, you know, the previous frames, right? Whether it's social justice or economic justice, those are critical, but they are not possible if we are continuing at high speed on, you know, when it comes to this climate crisis, right? So I, you know, for me, it's really important to, you know, to be there and provide the solidarity with Indigenous nations that are standing up and opposing resource.
I don't extend it to Niki. Hopefully I can attend her event on freeing Meng Wanzhou. I didn't even know she was doing that. That's cool, because I was giving her credit just for pointing out xenophobia in this interview, but I wasn't even aware that she was like getting on that more forcefully, which is really impressive. That's not an easy thing to do also, considering the fact that we're going along with that and at the behest of like the very powerful people in the United States kind of State Department and national security establishment. So there's some powerful forces that are kind of like pushing our government to fuck with China in this way. And the fact that she's pushing back on it in this interview and like you're saying with helping free Meng Wanzhou, I think that's really cool.
Extraction and development in their territories that they oppose. I think that's, you know, that's something that's very important for me. And I'm really proud to work with colleagues like Leah Gazan, who's on the forefront of this. And it's very important to push our own federal
I'm sure she needs to be careful because this puts her at odds with the right-wing establishment of the party. Absolutely.
Principled voice and put forward a strong principled vision to get it right on climate justice, on Indigenous justice, on economic justice, and social justice. We have no other choice but to do that. And you know, and I think what we've seen in the U.S., for example, where you know, and here in our own country, there's some really inspiring activism happening amongst young people. You know, in the U.S., we know of the Sunrise Movement. Here, you know, it's you know, 350.org. I mean, you know, they're connected all over the place. You know, folks are mobilizing in their communities at all levels. So there's some incredible activism happening.
That's right, Sam.
Already, and you know, and we should be gaining strength from that. We should be working with activists, with scientists, with advocates who are saying we need to and we can get this right. And I think that's it's a win-win for you know, for the NDP nationally and you know, and for Canadians.
If you have a few more minutes, I just wanted to ask you about your work with Progressive International. Like what exactly that is and how you got involved with Progressive International and what you're hoping to accomplish with your work with that organization.
Yes, I absolutely have a few minutes to talk about this.
Excellent.
So first off, I really encourage your listeners to sign up.
You can check out Progressive International
Progressive
afterwards.
International. It's online. Check out the website. It's got incredible resources. It's constantly, updated. Incredible resources from activists, intellectuals, academics, elected folks, artists from around the world who are calling out a system that is not working for us, a capitalist system that's not working for us, a political and economic system that's not working for us, the rise of the far right, they're calling it out, and they're putting forward bold, inspiring solutions. They're pointing to bold and inspiring activism on the ground with the ultimate goal of transforming this world into a just world for all of us. And I will say, at a time where we're seeing the right not just become emboldened, but learn from each other, at a time, for example, during this COVID crisis where a lot of us have felt more and more isolated, Progressive International is, I would say, has been a source of inspiration and solidarity for me, and I know for many others that I've spoken to, where we can learn from each other as progressives, where we can share ideas on how to mobilize at different levels, what kinds of policies we can put forward, what kind of campaigns we can be a part of, and what kind of world we can reimagine. So it's really exciting. This stems from the work that I was invited to do with Bernie Sanders a year and a half ago now, I guess, work that was aimed at, again, coming together and working together across borders. People like Yanis Varoufakis are part of it, from the States, Cornel West, John Cusack from around the world. I know folks that worked with Jeremy Corbyn are involved in it. There's a number of progressives from Latin America, including people that have worked with Evo Morales and other left-wing activists and leaders. Take a look. It's and please consider getting engaged. It's a nascent movement, so it's there's a lot of room for it to grow.
John Cusack, the actor,
but it's
Comrade
fueled by people and people power.
He's pretty based,
and I think I'm looking.
Sometimes he's kind of a lib, but he's pretty cool. John Cusack,
sharing the message more and more across our country, and really again, building, acting, thinking globally, and finding ways to connect the ideas we've heard PI talk about and acting locally.
Yeah. Well, it would have been nice if that could have been, if President Bernie Sanders could have been kind of at the center of that, but I guess that'll always be the one that got away for this generation.
Yes, yeah. But you know what? A number of his folks are connected, and, I'd love to do something with progressives in the States, to highlight the work of Progressive International, but also through that, learn from what they're doing there, well. To strengthen our own movements here in our own country, and really to emphasize the need for our political action as the NDP and as progressives in Parliament and in office, to really be progressive, and how that is that is where so many people are at, that is where so many young people are at, and most fundamentally, that's the future.
Yes, I agree. And Niki Ashton, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate that you took the time to talk to me, and I'm thankful we could connect on this. It was really great to speak with you.
My pleasure, Rob. And now we can all go back to our kids.
Yeah, I can't wait.
But really take care, and thank you for bringing us together in this challenging and isolating time. And let's keep finding ways to connect with each other, to build that solidarity, and let's take care of one another. So thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, well, that was fun, right? What do you think of that? I thought that was good. I was a little bit nervous. Talking to Niki Ashton, especially like when I had to kind of like push her in those kind of more uncomfortable places. That was a little odd, but I thought she was very good. I really enjoyed talking to her, even on those questions that kind of were a bit more uncomfortable. I thought she answered very well. So yeah, I thought I was pretty happy with that. I think it was a good interview to land for the first episode of 49th Parahell on the part of the Harbinger Media Network. It's a big part of like the launch of that, and I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it as well. That's really cool. And thanks once again to Niki Ashton for talking to me. Maybe we can get her to come on the stream sometime.